talking about this today,
Don't
weren't
look behind me.
we? Bloody hell. I mean, God, where do you start? Jesus. I mean, I start with the first one I ever saw, which was Planet of the Spiders when I was 4, 5. Gave me arachnophobia, lifelong arachnophobia, and genuinely petrified me. And I couldn't wait to be back the next week. And I think that was the thing with Doctor Who with me. It always felt comforting. There was a scare and a thrill, but I was never of the hiding behind the sofa thing with me. I always felt safe watching Doctor Who, even though it did overstep the mark sometimes.
Oh, which we're writing about right now. We've been discussing this very subject today. We're discussing what 80s moments from Doctor Who we're picking. And there's some pretty horrific things in 80s Doctor Who. I mean, Kane's face melting in Dragonfire is absolutely horrific for 7:30 on a, whether it was a Monday night or whatever it was. It's just, they just seem to just go, right, less people are watching, let's just horrify everybody with our, because I mean, one thing I know bothers Steve is that you suddenly get monsters starting to vomit when they die.
Yeah, I have a vomiting phobia. So the vomiting Cybermen with the milk coming out of the mouths in 5 Doctors, I couldn't watch that as a kid. That's kind of lovely.
Warriors of the Deep's another example of that. There's lots of vomiting sea devils and Silurians. Obviously the famously horrific things, the Litton's hands being crushed by the Cybermen.
I mean, that did overstep the mark.
Yes, absolutely did. Yeah, I mean, as I say, I think the Kane thing overstepped the mark a bit. I mean, some of Vengeance on Varys, I think, overstepped the mark a bit in the 80s. The acid bath thing. The thing I found most genuinely disturbed about Doctor Who, I mean, we actually say this, that I never hid behind the sofa because I didn't live in a house big enough to be able to get behind the sofa. But the thing that genuinely horrified me was Mr. Sin.
Yes.
The ventriloquist dummy from because I had a lifelong phobia of ventriloquist dummies.
I mean, it was bound to be there, wasn't it? I sound like a real hard. I don't think Doctor Who's ever really scared me as such, because I'm much more interested in the ideas rather than being scared by it. I mean, there's things that creep me out. I didn't like the maggots. Even in the recent series where they had the giant spiders, it was like, no, don't like giant spiders. So I suppose to that extent it sort of creeps me out. But I just think the idea of Doctor Who is so good, and I like the fact that sometimes it can do things that are a bit edgier and a bit scarier, and then sometimes it can be a bit silly, sometimes it can be ridiculous. But I think that, it's a classic series that has scared people across the generations, and I'm aware of those episodes that scared people. And there are ones that can say anything with creepy crawlies and insecty things always make me go, ugh. But only in a rather than I'm scared of them sort of way. But the one thing that Doctor Who which did send a shiver up my spine, and I don't know why particularly, and it goes way back. It's part 1 of Snake Dance, where they're in the TARDIS, and Tegan, who's previously been taken over by the Mara in the previous series, I think she's in bed and she's ill or something, and she turns around to Dr. Anitra and she shouts, "Go away," in this sort of demonic, possessed voice, so we know that the Mara is still in her. And I remember watching that thinking, I'm a bit of a shiver with that, because I wasn't expecting it. Anything with sort of the exorcisty demon type voices, and it's always a bit creepy. And I remember that one particular moment that always gave me a bit of a shiver, even though I was far too old to be scared by it by then.
As I'm sitting here in a museum dedicated largely to Doctor Who, I'm not going to pretend that Doctor Who didn't have a fairly massive effect on my life, because I'd be lying. But people go on again about being scared of Doctor Who. I just love Doctor Who. I found the monsters I just loved monsters. Just loved them. That's the museum. That is, some people collect, Doctor objects, or some people collect, I'm trying to think, sort of technological things or whatever it is. For me, it's anything off a monster. If a scale's fallen off a mandrill, I'll have it, and I'll revere it as a relic. Do you know what I mean? I'll have it, seriously. A bit of fluff off the belly button of a Krog, I love it. Do you know what I mean? So basically, I love Doctor Who, monsters, very much. So the monsters really got to me. There are 2 occasions in my entire life that Doctor Who scared me. And the first one was not on the telly. It was when I went to the Blackpool exhibition in '76. And there was a Zygon there, and a guy dressed up as a Zygon. I just watched it on the telly. and it blew me away. And my dad, remember, I could see the eye of the guy inside, and I could not bring myself to touch this Zygon. I just could not do it. And that was obviously the impact of being that age and seeing in the flesh a Zygon. Even though I knew it was a guy inside, it was just freaked me out. And the other time, the only time I did the behind the sofa thing, I've never, not been for me, I've been right up in front of the telly, frankly, was the Talons of Wang Chiang. And for some reason, the Magnus Greel reveal freaked me out. And I remember turning my face away. That was the only time. They must have, at the time, for a young person, they must have built that up sufficiently in my young mind that this guy, whatever was underneath that mask, was not going to be good. In fact, it was going to be downright horrible. And I remember that was the time I turned away from the screen. And the next week on the reprise, I remember clearly, I did peek it through my hands. I remember seeing this sort of contorted face. And I carried that memory of that face for the rest of my life till I got the VHS and watched it again.
I'm a big fan of the Tom Baker era. Not being a hardened Doctor Who fan, I tend to stick to the ones that I know, love, and I get a lot from. And what I get a lot from is, and even the Peter Davidson era, I did enjoy. But Tom Baker, for me, is Doctor Who. And those are the ones that I remember seeing on TV. They didn't necessarily frighten me, and I wouldn't put them in a horror bracket, unless you're talking about the Daleks or the Zygons. But yeah, it's a series that I really did enjoy. As a kid, and as an adult now, looking back, I probably appreciate them a lot more now than I ever did. They did have frightening episodes. I'm sure that you could reel them off, Dave. I cannot. But yeah, for the nostalgia, what a classic institution. I don't think there's much better than Doctor Who. Whether you like it or not, it's a fact.